Hello children, we are dealing with the chapter photosynthesis in higher plants. We learned an introductory part of it. Now we are moving on to the chapter where we are trying to understand where does photosynthesis take place. We know plants have a process called as photosynthesis, but which part of the plant is it that photosynthesis takes place? The immediate answer that you may give is the leaves of the plant. We have learned this in all our younger classes that it is in the leaves of the plant that photosynthesis takes place. Or in other words, we can also say that the green parts of a plant is where photosynthesis take place. Okay, so it is not just the leaves, but other green parts of the plant also photosynthesis occur. But major part or the primary photosynthesis part is the leaves of the plant. But where in the leaves? What exactly is it that present in the leaves which enable them to perform this function of photosynthesis? They are green in color. Why are they green in color? Because of the presence of a pigment called as chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is present in the green plastid called as chloroplast. Okay, so within the leaves, inside the mesophyll cells are nothing but a ground tissue. It is a plant tissue which is mainly found in the leaves of a plant. Alright, just like parenchyma. So, in the green plants, in the leaves which contain mesophyll cells, within the mesophyll cells there are green plastids which contain chlorophyll pigment. We have already learned the structure of plastid. Plastid is chloroplast is a double membrane cell organelle with a DNA of its own. If you look in the internal structure of chloroplast, we can see thylakoid. Many thylakoids arranged together to form the grana. They are connected to each other by stroma lamellae, and there is a fluid-filled matrix called as a stroma. Now, in this, we can see that there is a division of labor. What do you think I mean when I say division of labor? We'll understand that. So, till now we have understood that photosynthesis takes place in the green leaves of plant where chloroplasts are abundantly present in the mesophyll cells of the leaves. I hope whatever is written here, you write it down into your notebook so that you don't have to prepare another notes for this. Alright children. Now coming back to the structure of chloroplast, I told you there is a division of labor seen. So basically we have understood that photosynthesis happens in this chloroplast. But photosynthesis, is it a single step process? That's what we have learned till now. But today in this chapter you will understand that photosynthesis is as complex as it can get. And it occurs in two different phases. And it is seen that the chloroplasts show a division of labor when it comes to photosynthesis. Trapping of light and synthesizing ATP and NADPG. The first step in photosynthesis is trapping of light. We know that light is an essential component or essential raw material for the process of photosynthesis. And that light which is obtained from the only source, sunlight, sun, is captured, it is trapped, and then it is used for the synthesis of ATP and NADPH. ATP and NADPH are called as assimilatory power because it is this power which is later on used for the production of carbohydrate or sugar. Adanlo eventual aim of photosynthesis, making food, making carbon dioxide. So, but by trapping light, ATP and NADPH is produced, and that ATP and NADPH is called as assimilatory power. They are called as assimilatory power because it is this ATP and NADPH which is further later on used for the synthesis of carbon dioxide. Alright, now this process, this first step, it takes place in the membrane system of chloroplast. When I say membrane system, it means the thylakoid membrane. Membrane system, it refers to the thylakoid membrane. This is one thylakoid, and in its membrane, this first step is taking place, which is it? Trapping of light. That is, this membrane traps or captures the light and then uses it for the synthesis of ATP and NADPH, which is nothing but the assimilatory power. Okay, this is the first step. Then the next step is reduction of carbon dioxide into carbohydrates and sugar using the enzymes present. The next step is conversion of carbon dioxide into carbohydrate and sugar. This takes place in the stroma of chloroplast. Why? The stroma contains many enzymes. Which are capable of converting the carbon dioxide into carbohydrates and sugar. So the second step takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast. These are the two phases of photosynthesis. The first phase, since light is involved in it, is called as, first set of reactions is called as light reaction, because here there is involvement of light. Whereas in the second set or the second phase, all the reactions involved in the second phase, there is no involvement of light. Instead, you make use of all the products formed in the light reaction. They make use of the products formed in the light reaction for their further processing or further formation of carbohydrates and sugar. Hence, simply they are called as dark reaction. See, you must understand one thing here. Light and dark. This does not represent this happens during daytime and this happens during the night. No. Here there is use of light. Light is being used. But here sunlight is not being used directly. Instead, they are using the products of light reaction for the dark reaction. Simply a light dark it does not represent that it takes place in dark, okay, or at night. Alright, so these are the two phases or the two sets of reactions in photosynthesis, light reaction and dark reaction. We'll be learning light reaction and dark reaction separately, and you will understand that there is a lot of further simplified sets of reactions in light as well as dark reactions. So I hope you understood as to how to answer the question, where does photosynthesis take place? It takes place in the green part of the leaves, wherein chloroplasts are abundantly present. And within the chloroplast, light reaction happens in the thylakoid membrane. Dark reaction happens in the stroma. Light reaction involves trapping of light and synthesis of ATP and NADPH. Dark reaction involves using this assimilatory power, using the ATP and NADPH produced to convert carbon dioxide into carbohydrates and sugar, and also with the help of some enzymes present in the stroma. Alright. So just now we discussed about light reaction and dark reaction, and I told you that the membrane, thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast absorbs or traps the light. But have you ever wondered how is it that the chloroplasts are able to trap this light? Or in other words, why are the green plants green in color? Why do they appear green to us and not red and blue? Why? We can try to answer this question the same way we try to answer the question as to why the sky is blue in color. It is all in our perception. It is not blue in color. But because that light which comes from the sun is scattering the particles present in the atmosphere, we perceive the sky to be blue in color. Same happens here also. But here it is specially because of the presence of something called as pigments. Plants contain certain pigments in them which give them the particular color that they have. We see different shades of green, don't we? Light green, dark green. The different shades are there. All those shades, all those different shades are mainly because of different pigments present in the green plants. And these pigments play a very important role in photosynthesis also. So all those pigments which take part in photosynthesis, or we can say that the pigments involved in the process of photosynthesis are called photosynthetic pigments. The pigments involved in the process of photosynthesis are called as photosynthetic pigments. Okay, these pigments provide different shades of green in the leaves in different plants or on the leaves of the same plant. Okay, these pigments scientifically or experimentally they can be separated by something by process or by experiment called as chromatographic technique. Okay, chromatographic technique ഉപയോഗിച്ചിട്ട് the different pigments can be separated from each other. But let us move forward and try to understand different types of pigments. Now, based on significance of these pigments, there are basically two types of pigments, two types of photosynthetic pigments. Primary pigments and accessory pigments. Based upon their significance in photosynthesis, there are two types, primary pigments and accessory pigments. Primary pigment example is chlorophyll A, and accessory pigments are chlorophyll B, xanthophyll and carotenoids. Okay, so primary pigments and accessory pigments. Pigments are substances that have the ability to absorb light at specific wavelength. Just now we discussed 4 different pigments present in plants that have importance in photosynthesis, hence they are called as photosynthetic pigments. All those different pigments, they can absorb light, but each of them absorb light at different wavelength. They absorb light which is at different wavelength. Chlorophyll A absorbs light at different wavelength. Same goes for chlorophyll B and xanthophyll and carotenoids. They absorb light at different wavelength. Keep this in mind. They have the ability to absorb light, but at specific wavelength. Each one has specific wavelength of its own. You are well aware of the wavelength of visible spectrum, which includes VIBGYOR. A white light is nothing but VIBGYOR: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange and red. This is the visible spectrum, and these pigments absorb light from the visible spectrum only, which is having different wavelengths. 400 to 700 nanometer ആണ് ഇതിൻ്റെ visible spectrum wavelength, and the same applies for the pigments that is in consideration also. Alright, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, xanthophyll and carotenoids. Now let us understand which is the chief pigment associated with photosynthesis. Even though we discussed 4 different pigments, one of them is the most important pigment, or is the pigment which is involved in photosynthesis, the chief pigment of photosynthesis. Let us try to understand which that is using the graphs given in the textbook. The first graph given here is an absorption spectrum. Absorption spectrum in the sense they have made use of the different pigments and they have found out at which wavelength is the absorption of light the highest. It is shown that chlorophyll A is yellow, chlorophyll A is blue, carotenoid is yellow and chlorophyll B is the green one. And this is what they got, different peaks. Chlorophyll A Since it represents the different peaks, different absorption rate, it is also called as absorption spectrum. The absorption of each pigment has been shown here. So it is called as the absorption spectrum. Whereas in the second graph, the y-axis represents rate of photosynthesis and the x-axis represents the wavelength in nanometer. And they have shown at which wavelength the photosynthesis is the highest. As you can see here, two peaks are there. Two peaks at which the photosynthesis seems to be at its highest rate. Okay, so we can narrow it down to around 410, 420 nanometers, and the same applies here also. This is like near to 700 nanometers. So this shows that it is the peaks at which the photosynthesis is at its highest. In the last graph over here, they have compared. When they see, can you see, ee oru peakum similar aayittu varunathu, and this peak similar. Pigment india chlorophyll A inde. So they have just put both of them together to show that the peaks at which absorption by chlorophyll A and the peaks of rate of photosynthesis are both almost the same. This shows that the most important, the major pigment in photosynthesis is chlorophyll A. The major pigment in photosynthesis is chlorophyll A. See, other pigments are also involved in other parts of the photosynthesis. ഇവരൊക്കെ ഉണ്ട് ഇവിടെ. പക്ഷെ പീക്സ് നമുക്ക് കിട്ടുന്നത് chlorophyll A ന്റെ absorption spectral നിന്നാണ്. Other pigments are also involved. So even though we say that chlorophyll A is the chief pigment or chlorophyll A is the major pigment in photosynthesis, the other pigments are also taking part in photosynthesis. So whatever light is absorbed by carotenoid, xanthophyll and chlorophyll B, they transfer their light energy to chlorophyll A. It is not the entire work of photosynthesis and trapping of light is not done by chlorophyll A. Other pigments are also helping. Avare absorb cheyna allengi avare trap cheyna light okka avare endu cheyum chlorophyll A ke transfer cheyum. So they are like accessory, they are like helping pigments. All right. So from the graphs we can understand that most of the photosynthesis take place in the blue and red regions of the spectrum. Most of the photosynthesis take place in the blue and red region. It is in these regions that peaks were observed, both in absorption spectra as well as in the action spectrum. So blue and red regions lana usually photosynthesis koodalayitte കാണുന്നത് in the spectrum. Okay, so photosynthetically active radiation or PAR is that region of wavelength in which photosynthesis take place normally. Photosynthetically active radiation is the region of wavelength in which photosynthesis take place normally. So normally we can say it is around 450 nanometer to 650 nanometer, nearly around the same one. അപ്പം നമ്മുടെ chlorophyll absorb ചെയ്യുന്നത് blue and red light ആണ്. The chlorophyll absorbs blue and red light. Okay, always remember this. നിങ്ങളുടെ നീറ്റ് എക്സാമിലൊക്കെ ചോദിക്കാൻ സാധ്യതയുള്ള ഒരു ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ആണ്. ബ്ലൂ ആൻഡ് റെഡ് ലൈറ്റ് ആണ് chlorophyll absorb ചെയ്യുന്ന ലൈറ്റ്. And the region of wavelength in the spectrum which is photosynthetically active is called as a photosynthetically active radiation or PAR.